Okay, welcome back to Photosynthesis and Respiration test. My battery ran out on the phone, but we'll carry on. Our next job with this question, I won't give you all the answers, but is just to decide what's going on with the mitochondrion and the chloroplast. We have proton pumps operating over a membrane. Which membrane are we talking about? On the mitochondrion, we're talking about this inner mitochondrial membrane. And in the chloroplast, we're talking about this thylakoid membrane. Protons are being pumped where? Well, in the mitochondrion, they're being pumped into this intermembrane space. In the chloroplast, they're pumped into the thylakoid space. What happens to the protons then in chemiosmosis? Well, they diffuse back following a concentration gradient for protons back into, in the mitochondria, back into the matrix through the stalked particles, thus generating ATP, and in the chloroplasts back into the stroma, again via stalked particles. And question for part B. Explain the importance of ATP in cells. A bit misleading, this question, because it wants you to describe the advantages of ATP. So give a couple of uses of ATP, and hopefully one of those will hit the mark, and then tell us why ATP is absolutely brilliant at its job. For example, small packets of energy, but try and find some others from the notes to fill that. So sorry, the question's a little bit misleading there. Down in part 2, explain why ATP is sometimes called the universal energy currency. You need to say the word all at least a couple of times in there, so find a statement in your notes why ATP is universal, which means used by everything, but try and say that in the right way. Then we move on to question 3. I'm going to have to move a bit further away here. You can see more of my wonderful room. Some people live in this sort of mess, you know. Anyway, we've got a metabolic pathway going on, or a series of metabolic pathways. The first thing to realise is, oh hang on, we've got all sorts going on here. A, B and C. Well, we've got all sorts of different pathways, all appear to be going on all at once. Oh dear. Well, look for things that you recognise from the notes. So we've got a pathway here that starts off with glucose, ends with pyruvate. You only know one pathway that starts off with glucose and ends up with pyruvate. So treat that on its own and say hopefully you can identify A. B, we've got a cycle. Don't worry about which way it's cycling. And in this cycle, what do we recognise? Well, we recognise ribulose bisphosphate and CO2 going into this cycle. So hopefully you recognise that in either respiration or photosynthesis. Pick one of those. CO2 going in to that cycle. Down at the bottom we've got yet another cycle, and not much information actually in the cycle there, but a big clue, what's going in. So what's going in? Acetyl coenzyme A, and you only know one cycle where acetyl coenzyme A actually goes in. So hopefully you'll be able to figure out what's going on there. So you've identified the cycles. The question asks, how is it possible for all of these things to take place in one particular cell? So the answer is something to do with compartmentalization. So figure out what's driving all of these reactions, what's actually catalyzing these reactions, and do these take place all in the same place in the cell, or do they take place in different parts of the cell? Maybe you can identify the different places in the cell where any of these reactions take place. Then some missing words. A little bit of a tricky question. Part 3, a series of reactions essential for process B. So process B here. So there's another set of reactions needed so that B can go. And so the question isn't actually talking about B, it's talking about another series of reactions that take place in order for B to happen. And that's, you should figure that out then. Part B of the question, explain why photosynthesis is essential for the survival of animals on this planet. You're trying to figure out what products do plants make that animals use. So what products do plants make that animals use? And just use your photosynthesis equation to figure that out. Part C, plant cells also need nitrate ions to synthesize amino acids. State one other use of nitrates in plants. Well, try and think